Zara stood unflinching as the medic approached her lacerated arm. Blood, violet and viscous, oozed from the deep gash where shrapnel had torn through her exoskeletal plating. Among her people, the Vraxian, such injuries were badges of honor, proof of survival against impossible odds. Pain was not just endured but celebrated. "This requires immediate attention," the human medic said, his voice oddly soft to her quad-lobed ears. Zara bared her serrated teeth in what her species considered a smile. "The pain is glorious. It sings in my blood." The human, Nathan, according to his identification tag, looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Humans had such mobile, expressive faces compared to the rigid, plated visages of Vraxians. "I understand your culture values resilience," he said, "but infection doesn't care about cultural beliefs. Please, let me treat you." The joint military operation between humans and Vraxians had been underway for 3 standard months now. An unlikely alliance born of necessity against the Hive Collective. Yet despite fighting alongside these soft-skinned beings, Zara still found them bewildering. "Proceed," she conceded, extending her injured arm. "Though I require no pain suppressants. That would dishonor the wound." Nathan nodded, but something in his eyes, a strange warmth, made Zara's second heart flutter irregularly. "I'll work quickly." She expected him to begin immediately with the cauterization tool, as Vraxian medics would. Instead, his movements were methodical, careful. He cleaned the area first with something cool that didn't burn as expected. Most surprising was how he touched her, his fingers barely making contact with her armored skin, as though she were made of something fragile. "Why do you touch with such hesitation?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Are you afraid of my biology?" Nathan looked up, his hands continuing their gentle work. "I'm not hesitating. I'm being careful not to cause unnecessary pain." Unnecessary? The concept seemed foreign to her. On Vraxia, pain was necessary. It was how one proved worth, showed affection, marked significant life events. Their most intimate connections were forged through shared suffering. Pain is the path to strength. "Perhaps," Nathan said, now using a device that sealed her wound with remarkable precision, "but there are many paths to strength. Gentleness can require more control, more discipline." Zara watched his hands move across her arm, hands that had likely never crushed an enemy's throat or torn through battle armor. Yet they moved with confidence and skill. It was disorienting. When he finished, he stepped back. "There. It will heal cleanly now." Zara flexed her arm, expecting the searing pain that typically accompanied treatment. Instead, there was only a dull ache. She frowned. "You have robbed me of my pain." "I've helped you heal," he corrected, meeting her four-pupiled gaze without flinching. "Few humans could do that. There's a difference." Later, in her quarters, Zara performed her evening ritual of remembrance, pressing her clawed fingers into the hundreds of scars that mapped her battles across her body. Each one told a story of survival, of honor won through suffering. But her thoughts kept returning to the human medic and his strange, gentle hands. She touched the fresh wound he had treated. It was already forming a clean seal rather than the jagged scar tissue she was accustomed to. No Vraxian would have treated her with such care. They would have ensured the treatment itself was a test of endurance. For the first time in her life, Zara wondered, what would it be like to experience touch that didn't hurt? The thought was so aberrant, so contrary to everything she'd been taught, that she immediately performed a punishing set of physical exercises until her muscles screamed in protest. This pain was familiar. Comforting. Right. Yet as she finally drifted into sleep, her mind betrayed her again with an unbidden thought. She wanted to know more about this human and his unfamiliar touch. 3 days after her treatment, Zara found herself back at the medical bay. The wound itself was healing well, too well, by Vraxian standards. A proper healing left evidence, a reminder of battle survived. This clean, nearly invisible seam felt like cheating. "Commander Zara," Nathan greeted her with a nod. "Is your arm troubling you?" "No," she admitted. "It heals without proper tribute to the battle." Nathan's lips curved upward slightly. "That means it's healing correctly." Zara studied him, noting how his posture remained relaxed in her presence despite her towering frame and the bone spurs that protruded from her shoulders, adaptations that made Vraxians formidable close-combat fighters. "I require understanding," she finally said. "Your methods are foreign to me." Something flickered in Nathan's eyes, curiosity, perhaps. "I'm off duty in 20 minutes. Would you join me in the Arboretum? It's quieter there for conversation." The ship's Arboretum was a concession to human psychological needs. Vraxians found it wasteful. Growing plants for aesthetic purposes rather than sustenance seemed illogical. Yet as Zara entered the humid chamber filled with vegetation from Earth and allied worlds, something unexpected happened. Her normally rigid posture loosened, responding to the atmosphere. Nathan was already there, sitting on a bench beneath something with broad green leaves. He'd removed his medical coat, revealing simple civilian attire that somehow made him look more vulnerable. "The vegetation has a calming effect," he explained as she approached. "Something about the oxygen exchange, the humidity, the sense, it's good for humans." Zara remained standing, her clawed hands clasped behind her back in military posture. "Vraxians do not seek calm. We seek alertness, readiness." "Always?" Nathan asked. "Even in rest periods? Even when connecting with others?" The question caught her off guard. Among her people, connecting, whether in combat training, ceremonial scarification, or mating, was indeed a heightened, often painful experience. The idea of calm connection was contradictory. "Pain focuses the mind," she said. "It clarifies purpose." Nathan considered this. "May I show you something?" When she nodded, he stood and approached a flowering plant. With deliberate movements, he guided her clawed hand toward a delicate bloom. "Barely touch it," he instructed. "Just enough to feel the texture." Zara, whose hands were designed for rending armor and flesh, found this precision challenging. Yet she managed to brush her smallest claw against the petal with exquisite control. The sensation was startling. So soft it barely registered, yet somehow commanding her complete attention. "That's how I treat patients," Nathan explained. "With awareness of exactly how much pressure is needed. No more, no less." Zara withdrew her hand. "This serves what purpose?" "Not everything is about purpose," he said. "Some things are about experience." That night, Zara found herself unable to complete her pain ritual. Each scar she pressed felt different somehow, as though the memory of that feather-light touch had altered her neural pathways. She abandoned the ritual and instead found herself examining her hands, instruments of war, and wondering what else they might be capable of feeling. The next day, she sought Nathan out again. This time, he was in the mess hall. "I require further understanding," she announced, standing rigidly beside his table. Several nearby humans glanced nervously at her imposing figure, but Nathan simply gestured to the empty seat. "Join me?" Zara sat, the reinforced chair creaking under her dense musculature. "Your human connections, they lack the clarity pain provides?" Nathan took a sip from his cup before answering. "Pain can be clarifying, yes. But so can pleasure. So can comfort." "Comfort," she repeated, the word feeling strange in her mouth. "This is valued by humans?" "Very much so." "Show me," she demanded. Nathan's eyes widened slightly. Then, after a moment's consideration, he extended his hand, palm up, on the table. "Place your hand on mine." "If you wish." Zara stared at his open hand. To a Vraxian, this was an incomprehensible gesture. Open palms were for striking, for tests of endurance. Yet something compelled her to lower her clawed hand onto his, with excruciating care not to pierce his soft skin. The warmth of his hand against her cooler one created a sensation that traveled up her arm and into her chest cavity. Neither painful nor threatening, but something else. Something that made her second heart beat faster. "This is comfort?" she asked, her normally commanding voice unusually quiet. "A simple version of it, yes." When she finally withdrew her hand, the absence of his warmth left her strangely bereft. That night, her dreams were troubled by sensations that had no name in the Vraxian language, gentle pressures, soft warmths, touches that demanded nothing and yet somehow gave everything. She awoke determined to understand this weakness that didn't feel like weakness, this strength that required no pain. And somewhere deep in her consciousness, a dangerous thought formed: she wanted to feel his touch again. Word spread quickly among the Vraxian contingent. Commander Zara, decorated veteran of the Skull Nebula campaign, was spending increasing amounts of time with a human medic. Whispers traveled through the barracks, whispers that would have once ended with the Whisperer's blood on Zara's claws. But something had changed in her, and the other Vraxians sensed it. "Commander," growled Thrak, her second in command, as she entered the training arena. "We were beginning to think you had forgotten your own kind." 6 other Vraxian warriors paused their combat exercises, their quad-pupiled eyes fixed on her. The air filled with the acrid scent of challenge. "My duties to our alliance are not your concern, Lieutenant," Zara replied, rolling her shoulders to display her bone spurs, a subtle reminder of her superior rank and combat record. Thrak stepped closer, his massive frame blocking the light. "It is my concern when my commander begins to smell like weakness." He inhaled deeply. "The human scent clings to you. Soft. Fragile." In an instant, Zara had him pinned against the wall, her forearm pressed against his throat, her bone spurs inches from his eyes. The movement was so swift that the other warriors barely registered it. "Does this feel weak to you?" she hissed. Thrak bared his teeth in submission, but his eyes still held contempt. "Your form is strong, Commander. But your spirit. That is what concerns us. They say you let him touch you without drawing blood." Zara released him with a shove. "The alliance requires cultural understanding." "Understanding, yes. Contamination, no." Thrak straightened his armor. "Have you forgotten our ways? Pain is clarity. Pain is truth. Pain is love. Or has the human taught you to fear it now?" The accusation stung worse than any battle wound. Fear was the ultimate disgrace for a Vraxian. "Tonight. Ritual chamber. All of you," she commanded. "I will remind you why I lead." Later, in the designated chamber where Vraxians performed their ceremonial practices away from human eyes, Zara stood before her unit. She had stripped to her ritual attire, minimal armor exposing the map of scars across her gray-purple skin. She lifted a ceremonial blade. "Who questions my strength? Step forward." Thrak and 2 others moved forward. Without hesitation, Zara dragged the blade across her own shoulder, creating a perfect line of violet blood. "Match me," she challenged. The ritual proceeded as it always had, a test of endurance, each warrior inflicting identical wounds upon themselves, none flinching, none yielding. It was how Vraxians showed loyalty, proved worthiness, demonstrated love. By the end, the metallic scent of blood filled the chamber, and all doubts about Zara's commitment to Vraxian ways seemed settled. Yet as she cleaned her wounds afterward, alone in her quarters, Zara felt an unfamiliar emptiness. The ritual had not brought the usual satisfaction, the clarity of purpose through pain. Instead, she found herself wondering what Nathan would think of these self-inflicted wounds, these marks of Vraxian pride. The thought disturbed her enough that she sought him out the next day. She found him in the medical bay, reviewing patient files. His eyes widened when he saw the fresh cuts on her exposed shoulder. "What happened?" he asked, immediately reaching for a scanner. "Vraxian ritual," she stated flatly. "It is our way." Nathan's expression shifted to something complex: concern, confusion, and something else. Not disgust, as she had feared, but a deep sadness that made her second heart constrict. "You did this, voluntarily? To show strength? To prove loyalty?" She paused. "To show love." Nathan set down his scanner, his movements deliberate. "May I ask about that last part? Among my people, to share pain is to share truth. It is our deepest connection." She studied his reaction. "Your face shows you do not understand." "I'm trying to," he said carefully. "Humans express love differently." "Through this comfort you speak of?" "Yes. And through pleasure, through care, through gentleness." Zara considered this. "Show me." Nathan hesitated. "Here?" "No. Not here." That evening, she went to his quarters, a breach of protocol that would have scandalized both their species had anyone known. His living space was typically human, inefficient in its layout, filled with unnecessary items. Plants, images, books of actual paper. "You wish to understand my culture," Nathan said, gesturing for her to sit. "I want to understand yours too. Not just intellectually, but truly understand." "Why?" The question emerged before she could stop it. "Because I've never met anyone like you," he answered with a directness that matched her own. "Someone who experiences the world so differently yet seems to seek something similar." "And what is it I seek, human?" "Connection." The word hung between them, simple yet profound. "Among Vraxians," she began, "when we wish to show deep connection, what humans might call intimacy, we participate in shared pain rituals. The synchronizing of our suffering creates a bond nothing can break." Nathan nodded slowly. "And physical pleasure plays no role? Physical sensations beyond pain are undignified, unnecessary." Even as she said it, Zara felt the uncertainty in her own words. Nathan moved closer to her on the couch, careful not to touch her. "May I show you something different? You can stop me at any time." When she nodded, he slowly, so slowly, reached out and traced the ridge of her facial plate with his fingertips. The touch was so light she might have missed it if not for the unexpected warmth it generated beneath her skin. "This is how humans sometimes begin to show affection," he explained, his voice soft. Something within Zara trembled, not with fear or battle readiness, but with a new kind of anticipation. Her cultural training told her to recoil from this weakness, this softness. But another part of her, a part she was only beginning to discover, wanted to lean into his touch. "And this creates connection?" she asked, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "It can," he said. "If both wish it to." As his fingers continued their gentle exploration, tracing the patterns of her exoskeletal plates with curiosity rather than clinical detachment, Zara made a decision that would change everything. Instead of pulling away, she leaned forward, allowing herself to experience this foreign sensation fully. Her world, once defined by the sharp clarity of pain, began to blur into something new, something equally powerful but utterly different. Something that felt dangerously like surrender, yet somehow also like strength. In the days that followed, Zara found herself caught between two worlds. In the training arena and command center, she was still the formidable Vraxian commander, her decisions swift, her combat skills unmatched. But in the private moments with Nathan, she was becoming someone she didn't recognize, someone who craved sensations beyond pain, someone who found strength in vulnerability. Tonight, she stood outside his quarters, hesitating for the first time in her warrior life. Their previous encounter had awakened something within her, a hunger not for battle but for touch. For connection without bloodshed. The very thought should have shamed her. Instead, it drew her forward like a gravitational pull. When Nathan opened the door, his smile shifted to concern as he noticed the fresh ritualistic cuts across her collarbone. "Another ceremony?" he asked, stepping aside to let her enter. "Affirmation of command," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. "My warriors needed reassurance." Nathan nodded, understanding more than she had expected. Cultural identity is powerful. Yes. She paced his small quarters, suddenly restless. Her dual hearts raced within her armored chest. "But I find myself questioning." "What questions do you have?" Nathan asked, keeping a respectful distance. Zara turned to face him, her quad-pupiled eyes unblinking. "You spoke of pleasure as an alternative to pain. Of comfort as an alternative to endurance." She straightened her already perfect posture. "I wish to understand more." Nathan's expression softened. "Understanding requires trust. Are you willing to trust me, Zara?" No Vraxian would ever ask such a question. Trust was proven through combat, through shared survival. It was not given, it was earned through blood and scars. Yet here was this human, asking for it as though it were something that could be freely offered. "I am," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. Nathan gestured to his small couch. "Sit with me. I'd like to show you something humans call comfort." The couch creaked under her dense frame as she sat rigidly beside him. Nathan turned to face her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin but not quite touching. "May I?" he asked, his hand hovering near her arm. At her nod, he gently placed his palm against the armored plates of her forearm. But instead of the brief touch she expected, his hand began to move in slow, circular motions. "This is called a caress," he explained, his voice soft. "It's meant to soothe, to comfort, to create connection." The sensation was unlike anything Zara had experienced. Where Vraxian touch was direct, forceful, and purposeful, designed to test or challenge, this movement created waves of warmth that rippled through her body in unexpected ways. "What is its purpose?" she managed to ask, her normally commanding voice slightly unsteady. "To give pleasure." Nathan's eyes met hers. "To make you feel good." "Good," she repeated, as though testing the concept. Vraxians had no word that precisely matched the human concept of feeling good outside of battle triumph. As his touch continued, moving carefully from her arm to her shoulder, navigating around the sharp edges of her bone spurs, Zara felt something inside her loosening, an internal armor as rigid as her external plates beginning to soften. "May I touch you in return?" she asked suddenly. Nathan nodded. "Of course." With exquisite care, the same precision she used to wield weapons in battle, Zara lifted her clawed hand and mimicked his movements against his arm. The texture of his skin was fascinating, so different from her own armored exterior, yet clearly strong in its own way. "Am I hurting you?" she asked, acutely aware of how easily her claws could tear through human flesh. "No," Nathan assured her. "Your touch is perfect." Perfect. No one had ever used that word for her outside of combat evaluation. The praise affected her in ways she hadn't anticipated, creating a warmth in her chest cavity that had nothing to do with her dual heart's exertion. Slowly, with each passing moment, their touches became bolder. His fingers traced the edges of her facial plates, lingering at the sensitive seams between them, places no warrior would ever allow to be touched in combat. Her hands explored the contours of his shoulders, the column of his neck, the curve of his jaw, all with a gentleness she had never known herself capable of. When his fingers found a particularly sensitive junction between her neck plates, Zara made a sound she had never heard herself make before, not a battle cry, not a challenge, but something softer. Something vulnerable. Nathan paused. "Too much?" "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "More." What followed was a discovery of sensations Zara had never imagined possible. His lips, so soft compared to Vraxian mouth parts, pressed against the sensitive areas where her exoskeletal plates met, creating shivers of pleasure that ran through her nervous system like electrical currents. When he guided her to lie beside him on his bed, reinforced for her weight, she didn't resist. The warrior who had never yielded in battle surrendered willingly to these new experiences. In my culture, she said as his hands continued their exploration, intimacy requires blood. Nathan's fingers paused on the ridge of her hip plate. And in mine, it requires consent and care. His eyes met hers. What do you want, Zara? Not what your culture demands, but what you desire. No one had ever asked her that question. Vraxians did not speak of individual desire, only collective strength, honor, survival. I want. She began, searching for words in a language not designed for such concepts. I want to feel what humans feel. I want to know this thing you call pleasure. I want. You. His smile then was like nothing she had seen before, not triumph, not dominance, but a pure expression of joy that made her second heart skip a beat. Then let me show you, he whispered. Their bodies joined in ways that defied Zara's understanding of physical connection. Where Vraxian mating was ritualized combat ending in brief biological necessity, this was a dance of giving and receiving. A constant exchange of gentle pressure and release, of heat and movement, of sounds that carried no aggression but tremendous power. For the first time in her existence, Zara experienced pleasure untainted by pain, waves of sensation that built upon each other until her entire nervous system seemed to explode in a burst of electrical fire that left her gasping, trembling. After, as they lay together in the dim light, his body curled protectively around her armored form, Zara finally understood what humans meant by vulnerability as strength. Is it always like this? She asked, her voice unusually soft. Nathan's fingers traced lazy patterns across her shoulder plates. Not always. But at its best, yes. My people would not understand this. Do you? He asked gently. Zara considered the question carefully. I am beginning to. This connection. It requires a different kind of courage than battle. As she drifted into sleep beside him, another unprecedented vulnerability, Zara realized that she had crossed a boundary from which there could be no return. She had experienced a form of strength her warrior culture had never taught her, never even hinted existed. And she wanted more. The summons came at dawn, a formal request for Commander Zara to appear before the Vraxian High Command via quantum communication. Such calls were rare, reserved for matters of grave importance or significant honor. Zara knew this was neither. Someone had reported her. She stood rigidly before the holographic projections of 3 Vraxian elders, their battle-scarred faces revealing nothing as they examined her. Commander, the central figure began, his voice crackling with authority, reports reach us of concerning behavior. Fraternization with a human beyond alliance requirements. Adoption of foreign practices. Neglect of pain rituals. His 4-pupiled eyes narrowed. How do you respond? My mission effectiveness remains optimal, Zara stated. The alliance objectives are being met. We did not ask about mission parameters, the female elder to the right cut in. We asked about your adherence to Vraxian ways. Zara had anticipated this confrontation, had rehearsed responses that would satisfy her superiors while allowing her to continue seeing Nathan. Yet standing before them, she found herself unwilling to speak anything but truth. I have discovered alternative methods of connection, she said. Methods that do not require pain. A heavy silence fell. The center elder leaned forward. Explain. The human approach to physical and emotional bonding differs from ours. They value gentleness, pleasure, comfort. She paused, then added, I have experienced these. The third elder, who had remained silent until now, slammed his fist against an unseen surface. Disgraceful. You speak of weakness as though it were worthy of consideration. Is it weakness? Zara challenged, something she would never have done before meeting Nathan. I have not diminished in combat ability. My tactical decisions remain sound. My loyalty to our people stands firm. Yet you question our most fundamental beliefs, the female elder observed. The unity of pain and strength. The honor of endurance. I question nothing, Zara replied. I add to my understanding. The center elder studied her. You believe there is value in this human approach? I do. And if we ordered you to terminate this relationship? To return fully to Vraxian practices? The question hung in the air between them. 6 months ago, Zara would have complied without hesitation. Duty above all. Now, the thought of never experiencing Nathan's touch again created a sensation worse than any battle wound. I would request reassignment from the Alliance mission, she said finally. As my effectiveness would be compromised. The elders exchanged glances that spoke volumes in the subtle language of Vraxian facial movements. This human has affected you deeply, the center elder observed. Yes. Another silence fell, this one contemplative rather than condemning. Our alliance with humans is predicated on mutual benefit despite profound differences, the female elder said. Perhaps there is value in deeper understanding of their ways. The third elder bristled. You cannot suggest we endorse such deviation from tradition. I suggest nothing, she replied. I merely observe that cultural evolution has always been part of Vraxian history. Our ancestors did not practice many rituals we now consider fundamental. The center elder raised a hand, silencing further debate. Commander Zara, you will continue your mission. You will not abandon Vraxian practices entirely. You will document your observations of human bonding methodologies for scientific analysis. His tone softened marginally. And you will teach this human our ways, to the extent he can comprehend them. It was not full acceptance. But it was not rejection either. Understood, Zara said, saluting with her fist against her chest plate. As the communication ended, Zara stood motionless, processing the unexpected outcome. Then, for the first time in her military career, she found herself hurrying, not to battle, but to share news. She found Nathan in the arboretum, tending to the plants that had become their mutual sanctuary. His face brightened when he saw her, then grew concerned at her expression. What's happened? He asked, setting aside his tools. Zara explained the communication, the questioning, the conditional acceptance of their relationship. They want me to teach you Vraxian ways, she concluded. Nathan considered this. I want to learn. Not to practice all aspects, perhaps, but to understand what shapes you. He touched her face gently. Just as I want to share human ways with you. The path forward will not be easy, Zara warned. Many of my kind will still see this as weakness. And some of my kind might not understand either, Nathan acknowledged. Different doesn't always mean easy. That evening, in the privacy of Nathan's quarters, Zara introduced him to a modified version of a Vraxian connection ritual. She carefully applied ceremonial ink to his skin, tracing patterns that told the story of her battles, her lineage, her pride. Traditionally, these would be cut into the skin, she explained. But the meaning remains in the pattern, not the method. Nathan watched with fascination as the violet lines formed across his chest. It's beautiful, he said. Your culture has such precision, such attention to detail. When she finished, he took the ink and asked her to show him where to apply it on her body. Together, they created a new pattern, one that incorporated elements of both their worlds. Later, as their bodies joined in what was becoming a familiar dance of gentle touch and mounting pleasure, Zara realized something profound. The intense sensations that coursed through her body during their intimacy were not so different from what she experienced in battle. the heightened awareness, the focus, the rush of biochemical reactions. The path was different, but the destination held similarities she hadn't recognized before. "There is a commonality," she murmured against his neck afterward. "Between our ways." "What's that?" Nathan asked, his fingers tracing the edges of her shoulder plates. "Intensity. Presence. Full engagement of the senses." She propped herself up to look at him. "My people seek these through pain. Yours through pleasure. But the state they create." She struggled to find the words. "The clarity, the connection to the moment, they are not so different." Nathan smiled. "Different paths to the same summit." "Yes." They lay together in comfortable silence until Zara spoke again. "Tomorrow I return to pain rituals with my unit. It is expected. Necessary." "I understand," Nathan said, and she knew he did, not just intellectually but with genuine acceptance. "And tomorrow night?" he asked. "Tomorrow night," she replied, "I return to you. To this." She gestured between them, indicating the space they had created together, a territory that belonged to neither human nor Vraxian culture, but something new. Something that honored the strength of her traditions while embracing the gentleness of his. As she curled her armored body protectively around his softer form, Zara understood that she had not abandoned her warrior identity. She had expanded it. Pain had taught her endurance, but pleasure had taught her surrender, and in that surrender, she had found a different kind of strength. A strength that came not from withstanding suffering, but from allowing joy. A strength that recognized vulnerability not as weakness, but as courage. A strength built on connection rather than conquest. And as sleep claimed them both, the Vraxian warrior who had known only pain for most of her life held gently to the human who had shown her another way, careful even in unconsciousness not to hurt him with her claws, her plates, her spurs. In that careful embrace was everything she had learned, that true strength lay not in the ability to endure pain or inflict it, but in the choice to prevent it when possible. In the willingness to be gentle when gentleness was called for. In the courage to allow touch that healed rather than hurt. And in that understanding, Commander Zara of the Vraxian battle fleet had perhaps become the strongest warrior her people had ever known.